It's not the first Fantastic Four movie, but it is the first Fantastic Four movie to be produced by Marvel Studios. This is the way forward. These are the first steps into the future. Fantastic Four First Steps was super promising. This year, Marvel have really kind of gotten their act together a little more. While I thought Captain America Brave New World was weak as water, it was more than made up for by your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Daredevil, Born Again, and the Thunderbolts. And with Fantastic Four First Steps, we are doing something I've wanted to see Marvel do for such a long time. A film set in a comic booky world. Kinda 60s inspired retro future. Like the complete and total opposite of 2015's Fantastic. This thing here was really confident in its comic book roots, and it looked like a love letter to Jack Kirby. So I did have high hopes for Fantastic Four First Steps, moving away from that MCU formula to do something really unique. Now that I've seen the movie, I can safely say that Fantastic Four First Steps is absolutely freaking okay. Oh, buds. Yeah, I'm sure there's gonna be people in the comments angry about the fact I didn't love this movie, but let me tell you something, no one's more angry about that fact than me. Because I really wanted this to be a big smash, when in actuality, I ended up leaving the cinema thinking, there are a lot of things that worked, and there were also a lot of things that really didn't. Now, I'd love to do this spoiler-free like I did with Superman, but I think to kind of explain what my issues with this movie are, I cannot do this spoiler-free. Because you're not really gonna understand why the negative parts of this movie kind of bothered me as much as they do if I don't, explain what they consist of. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, come back later. Now, obviously, if you know me, you know that I can love movies that are flawed. You know I can make cases to say that movies that are flawed are actually fantastic.
Say that again?
Shut up! I do not conflate perfection with flawlessness. For me, this one's a bit too flawed. It's kind of infuriatingly flawed in parts. But okay, let's start with some positives. It has a really, really strong first act. It does feel like kind of a stretched out montage. Get it stretched. In fact, the whole film is actually very montagey from start to finish. But for that first act, they are just selling you on this unique world of the Fantastic Four, this retro future, where people adore the Fantastic Four. You've got Mark Gatiss' talk show as kind of this framing device for the Fantastic Four's origin story, which is all told through this, which is a very efficient way of kind of laying down the foundations of a story that we have seen before. And immediately, I am in love with the overall style of this movie. The Fantastic Four, they're not wearing the usual militarized kind of rubber suits. They're wearing turtleneck sweaters. And the suits look great, and it's honestly a shame they don't get more screen time. They only really wear those at the first scene and the end scene of the movie. But from the jump, this is probably one of the most comic booky MCU films ever made. Stylistically, it feels a lot like The Incredibles, and for a while I was thinking, if Incredibles is the first true Fantastic Four movie, then what if this is the true Incredibles 2? I do like Incredibles 2, but obviously as a sequel, it lives very dimly in the shadow of its predecessor. But you got this opening that's filled with cameos from different Fantastic Four villains such as Mole Man and Giganto. Not that one. And Mole Man goes from a fun cameo to a genuinely integral character in the third act, which I thought was actually a great utilization of that character. And all of the stuff with the scenes in space as the Fantastic Four go to face off against Galactus for the very first time is really tense stuff, and it looks great. The performances are also really strong. Pedro Pascal, yes, he's a stunt cast, but he does really well in the role. To be honest, I always saw the potential in Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, and I'm not really surprised to see he did a great job. Still a stunt cast, there's no getting away from that, but it is one that worked out in the end. Vanessa Kirby really gets the spotlight as Sue Storm in this movie. She is a central character here. I don't know if she was really the team leader in that dynamic. I get the feeling that press junket was trying to score some points. But she's definitely a lead in this film. Like, Reed and Sue are at the core of this movie, and both Vanessa Kirby and Pedro Pascal do great in these roles. Unsurprisingly, Joseph Quinn works really well as the Human Torch. I could see that one as soon as they mentioned it. And forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong here, but Ebon Moss-Bachrach is great as the Thing. Like, he's about as good of a Thing as you could ever ask for. Unfortunately, a little underutilized, but I will say the brotherly dynamic between Joseph Quinn's Human Torch and Ebon Moss-Bachrach's Thing is one of the highlights of this movie. There was a great sense of banter between the two, and yeah, there was excellent chemistry between the entire Fantastic Four. It definitely feels like as the film goes on in that second half, certain characters start to feel a little lost in the source. Even Reed starts to feel a little lost in the source, because there is just a lot going on here. In terms of the utilization of the powers, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sue very rarely outright turns invisible. They use a lot more of kind of her force field power, but there was one use of her invisibility power that I thought was actually really clever, and that was when she used her invisibility to look at her baby before he was born. Unfortunately though, Reed's powers feel incredibly underutilized. Every time he did a stretchy thing, I was like, oh yeah, he can stretch, can't he? And as for the Thing, he's also pretty underutilized. We don't really get that much of a sense of the sacrifice of Ben's humanity, beyond like a couple of shots of him looking at himself on a TV screen. He gets a subplot with a sort of love interest, but it amounts to just two people saying hi and having a chat, like, twice. While Jennifer Garner does a good job as the Silver Surfer, I'm not really sure why we went for the Shalla-Bal version of the character. There's a point where we very lightly touch on her origins, but the exploration of this character goes absolutely no further than that, and she ends up being pretty interchangeable with the OG Silver Surfer, who I personally would have much rather have had, purely for familiarity's sake. Sure, we could get familiar with Shalla-Bal, but the Silver Surfer being this version doesn't really add anything to the movie, except like 5 too many jokes about Johnny Storm being attracted to her. Because the film has to remind you that it's an MCU movie. With its trademark, ha ha ha, he's heterosexual. Isn't that funny? He finds women attractive. That's hilarious. The humor in this movie is a little strange, in that for the most part there's less humor in this than there is in your average MCU film, which is a welcome change. But with the humor that is there, for every hit, there's also an overused gag, including a gag with Sue watching as the fellas struggle to set up Franklin's car seat, and that drags on for ages. I was done smiling at that long before the halfway point of that joke. And the Thing not saying it's clobberin' time thing that we saw in the trailer, that you could immediately tell exactly where that was going. He says it in a cartoon, and he's not gonna say it until the very end where he really yells it with feeling, and it's like, yeah, we've seen this a million times before, to the point it just elicited an eye roll from me. They've gone so hard in the direction of making this very comic booky, to the point where I don't understand why it's clobberin' time is treated as something so ridiculous for the Thing to say. And that's one area where this film differs from, say, Superman. Yes, it looks comic booky, just as Superman does, but the overall dialogue and storytelling isn't comic booky like it is in Superman. It is very MCU. Okay, but we gotta talk about Galactus. It's great that we finally have an authentic adaptation of Galactus, and for the most part, he's solid. He's supposed to be this cosmic being beyond understanding, and he certainly comes across as such. They make excellent use of keeping him in the shadows, and when he's looming over the Fantastic Four in the distance, he's genuinely very intimidating. Ralph Ineson is also pitch perfect as the voice of Galactus. He just has that very intimidating cosmic sound to him, very otherworldly and almost kind of uncanny. When he gets to Earth, it's a bit of a different story. He has an all CGI human face, which you know I'm never a fan of, but I will admit, they at least knew how to light it in a way that didn't look too bad. Definitely would have preferred it if we could have actually seen Ralph Ineson's face under the helmet for the scenes on Earth, but this did work much better than it could have, thanks to solid lighting and composition. It also helps that when he's got his eye lenses down, it looks very spooky. In terms of creating this otherworldly presence, I'd say they succeeded. So good job, Mambly Bombly. Having Franklin Richards in the mix adds a lot of stakes and humanity to this film. So, to give context, Galactus offers to spare the Earth in exchange for Franklin Richards, believing him to be some kind of cosmic deity, some super baby. How does he know this? Why is he interested? We don't go into it. So, with the baby sacrifice, what the Fantastic Four are trying to overcome in this movie is ultimately going to be understandable to anybody with any kind of parental instinct. An instinct I sure as hell don't have, but babies are to breeders what dogs are to me. And I sure as hell ain't sacrificing a puppy to Galactus. What, to save a bunch of you jerks? I'll take, bro. Yeah, nah, you're good. I'm sticking with the puppy. Even if it only lives a paltry 15 years. Where the fuck was I? Marmite Studies was founded in August of 1993. So upon returning to Earth, Reed Richards just kind of spills his beans about what the Fantastic Four were up to on Glumpus Major. How they could have guaranteed the Earth's safety there and then, but refused to because they didn't want to part with their child. This makes them public enemy number one to everyone, everywhere, at all times. This, of course, results in severe consequences for the Fantastic Four, as they're accused of being traitors to humanity. They're detained, there are riots going on in the streets, the governments all want them executed, different countries are blaming each other for the Fantastic Four's actions as they're considered representative of the United States. Actually, none of that happens. The Thing is just kind of walking down the street and some passers-by are like, hey, what about us? Yeah, the world has been marked for death, and yet the human race is remarkably calm. The Silver Surfer instructs them to celebrate and just kind of die with dignity, you know? Keep their loved ones close, and I think the human race just kind of listens, is like, yeah, alright, yeah, I can get behind that. Because down on Earth, there's not really any consequence of that either. Now, Sue, yeah, she kind of gives Reed Richards the actions speak louder than words talk, when Reed is trying to reassure her that he's not going to sacrifice the baby, and even if he considers it, that doesn't mean that he wants that. Then, a single scene later, Sue Storm, unsupervised, walks out into the most civilized angry mob in the world, without cameras on her, without any microphones, so I have no idea how the people in the back heard, and basically says, but what if we save our kid and the world? And then everyone, so touched by Sue's speech, puts down their pitchforks, feels really bad about it, and then all of the countries unite for Reed Richards' grand plan. Well, that's a bit of a stretch. This feels like a part of the script that was basically just on first draft. So, Reed Richards' grand plan is, I'll just let Patrick explain it.
Take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else!
Alright, so early in the film, it's established that Reed Richards has discovered the secret of teleportation, and he's able to transport an egg to another table in the same room, and as a result, the power goes out. But when Reed gets the idea of taking Earth and putting it somewhere else, suddenly tons of these giant, finalized teleportation machines are set up all around the globe. Now, the idea is that it would take millions of years for Galactus to find the Earth again, and by that point, they could just teleport it again. So, here's the question. What do you plan to do about the sun? I mean, what more need be asked, really? You gonna bring the moon with you as well? Keep those tides the same? Now, sure, maybe they could take some time to chart a course, decide where they're going. Maybe they'll be in orbit of a similar sun or just on the other side of the same sun, but that's never once mentioned. I'm not saying we need to see every single step in this process, but for a film that is so aggressively montage-heavy, I'm surprised we didn't cover that. There are so many logistics involved in this plan that are just not accounted for. Now, I realize that logistics are going to be a little different in this world. Maybe we could have taken a moment to show that. That could have been really cool to see. You've also got human beings, the most argumentative species in a known universe, all uniting for a common cause, which I could maybe look past as just, hey, maybe humans are more agreeable in this universe. But then it's stated earlier that there are Galactus cults, people that are in favor of Galactus. This is what I mean when I say you could really feel how many cooks were in the kitchen with this one. And if that's not contrived enough for you, how about Johnny Storm flawlessly learning an alien language based on a couple of vinyls of the Silver Surfer's voice echoing across the galaxy between the time of the Silver Surfer's arrival and Galactus' arrival, which is supposed to be, what, like a matter of months? I studied German for like 3 years and I still have no grasp on that language. But Johnny learning Shalabal's native language based on a couple of vinyls is just a bit of a stretch, don't you think? Are we going by the logic that if you listen to a language long enough, you can just learn to understand it? You're gonna need things to reference. You can't just listen to a bunch of, like, say, I don't know, like, Japanese sentences and then suddenly understand Japanese. You gotta put, like, words side by side, you gotta translate. And here's the thing with this movie, it is contrivance on top of contrivance. And I know I'm going to get the absolute smartest person in the world telling me, it's a movie about a stretchy guy and his invisible wife. But I've got 2 little words that debunk that entire sentiment. Internal logic. A zany concept doesn't just give writers the excuse to be sloppy, and This script is incredibly sloppy. You might say it's a flaming mess. You might say it's a little rocky. You may say some ideas were just stretched a little too thin. You might say I wish I didn't see it. The last one's not actually true. Now, I'd say the characterization is pretty strong in this movie, but Reed Richards unfortunately does fall victim to character assassination, and based on the confusion caused by my preview post, I feel like I should probably explain what I mean by character assassination. I don't mean that a character literally gets assassinated. Character assassination, in movie terms, refers to when a character is just portrayed in a way that undermines their established traits. Reed Richards is supposed to be the smartest man in the world, but also someone who thinks with his head and not so much his heart. And Fantastic Four First Steps doesn't really reflect that, and I'd say undermines it too. Reed Richards is an idiot. His plan to move the Earth doesn't account for the sun. During the third act, he has a plan to use his own baby as bait for Galactus, have Johnny Storm blind Galactus, and then swap the real baby out for an empty baby cot. Reed Richards believes that this otherworldly, incomprehensible, otherworldly creature can just be fooled like that. What, you want to put a rat trap out with a piece of cheese on it? Maybe drop an anvil on his head? But also he brings his heavily pregnant wife into space to confront Galactus with him. And the worst part is, nobody ever suggests that this might be a bad idea. There's conflict and tension between Reed and Johnny, as there should be, but it's not about this. It's about spacesuits or something. The thing is, as I say, Reed is known for thinking with his head before his heart, so we could have maybe had a scene of him rationalizing bringing Sue with as helping the odds, and Johnny objecting to this. Then you would have had an authentic reflection of Reed Richards as a character, and also have the tension between him and Johnny just be a bit more understandable. But instead, it's never really brought up. There's a point where Reed tells Sue that she's going to be the first pregnant woman in space, and then Sue just kind of says, I know, and that's all we do with this. And Reed thinking with his head and not his heart isn't even really very consistent, as throughout the movie, he's a piping hot mess about this baby's safety. Reed is an irresponsible idiot. Sure, his science smarts rarely translate to street smarts. That's true of the source material, and they make a point of it here. But sheesh, at least let something he does work. Instead, Galactus is defeated by brute force from Sue, and Shalabal fresh from a pep talk with Johnny. So Shalabal's arc is basically, someone just needed to speak her language, and then suddenly she turns against Galactus. Sue Storm dies as a result of overexerting herself, but then baby Franklin is able to bring her back to life with his magic touch. And my housemate thought this was incredibly powerful, as like the baby and the mother giving each other life, and I get the sense that was probably the intent of the writers. But personally, I can't get past the fact that they pull the old third act post-final battle death that lasts like a minute and they really try and sell you on. And then, oh no, don't worry, she's fine. Yay, oh man, oh, I was so shocked for a minute there, wow. I could hear people in the cinema giggling at this. And you know what, I get it. It probably sounds like I really don't like this movie, but that's not really true. I do like Fantastic Four First Steps for its vision. I could see it. The production team clearly locked in hard for this movie and crafted something that looks and sounds spectacular. I can't in good faith call it all style and no substance because it's clearly trying to tell a story with real emotional stakes, but it's taking some outright nonsensical leaps to get there, and it's really disappointing to see such an, in my opinion, low script quality paired when the production is this gorgeous. It's like style with substance, I just think the substance kind of sucks. I like the movie, but the script feels like it was a draft or two away from being truly done. If you want a version of the Fantastic Four that's clearly acknowledging the source material, then this is that. I'd still probably say it's the best Fantastic Four movie, pending a watch of the Roger Corman version, because I want to see that. And it's like if I gave this like a star rating or something, I'd probably give it like a 3 stars, or for a score out of 10, maybe like a high 6, low 7 kind of deal. C-. This is a C- movie. One positive I'm definitely taking away from this, though, is like, put this and Superman side by side, and you've got 2 comic book movies that are very unashamed of their source material. 2 of the most comic book movies in recent memory. At least as far as live action goes. Gotta give the Spider-Verse movies their dues there. And I think maybe we could be ushering in this new era of comic book movies feeling like comic books. And that's something I can safely say about the Fantastic Four, is it does feel like a comic book, it just doesn't feel like a very well written one to me. And that's disappointing. But at the same time, I really like how much it does feel like a comic book. Also, the dedication to Jack Kirby was really nice. Also, gotta say, Michael Giacchino's score is excellent as well. His Fantastic Four theme is like the perfect theme for the Fantastic Four. It's the most Fantastic Four-y sounding thing you could come up with. The mid-credits as well, very exciting. That's a really cool way to introduce Doctor Doom. And it does look like he's going to have a very faithful look to the comics as well, so that makes me very happy. I still really wish he wasn't being played by an American actor. Only person who can play Doctor Doom, my ass. But it does at least look like they are honoring the character. And then you got this darling little Hanna-Barbera style outro, which is really cute. Matt Shakman's DNA is all over this, and I'm gonna be honest, I do not think they could have found a better director for this. I just wish they wrote a better script. Tell me what you think in the comments below and get your ass out of here.